Thank you so much, and I'm so glad to be here at MIT, which ever since I was an undergrad has been one of the right places in the world for me. What I want to do today is talk to you about science. This is the School of Science. MIT is a great hub of science. All of you in this room and MIT in general are dedicated to science, and so am I. It's our faith. And all of you, one way or another, are going to carry that dedication and faith out into the broader world. But there's a question. We believe in science, but what is this science that we believe in anyway? There's no credo or church or text that tells us what science is. One picture might be that science is this very specialized elite, note the scare quotes, elite activity that's done by very special people, people like the ones in this room, people who are exceptionally smart and exceptionally ambitious and possibly just a little on the weird side. But cognitive scientists tell us that science is actually both more profound and more universal than this picture would suggest. What makes you a scientist isn't your A+ grades and your diplomas. It isn't even your knowledge of physics and chemistry. What makes you a scientist isn't, in fact, science isn't really a kind of knowledge at all. It's a kind of desire. What makes you a scientist is your insatiable curiosity about the world around you, your restless drive to experiment and explore, and your parallel desire to explain, to make up new theories, create hypotheses, think of things no one has ever thought before. But the important point I want to make today is that these desires aren't just the preoccupations of a few people around Kendall Square. They're an important, in fact, a crucial part of what makes us all human. Now, human beings evolved to deal with a very special kind of environment. It's the fact that we have no special kind of environment. Our world is what computer scientists call a non-stationary environment. That means a world that changes from generation to generation in unpredictable, novel ways. The unknown unknowns are our evolutionary niche. High-dimensional, out-of-distribution problems, the problems that still completely baffle current AI, those are our human specialty. They're what we're designed to tackle. We have, all of us, always been immigrants. That's part of the human condition. Unlike our closest primate relatives, humans always moved from place to place, and we had to discover just what each of those places were like. We had to be scientists. And more than any other primate, we construct our own environments, and we always have. We made our own worlds, so we had to be engineers too. It's conventional to tell graduates that you're going out into a world that will change in unpredictable ways, that the future you face will be utterly unlike the past, and that's all true, and it's certainly as true now as it's ever been. But that's always been true. That's been true ever since we ventured onto the veldt with an alderwood digging stick and a stone axe. Fish gotta swim, and birds gotta fly, and humans gotta science. That's our jam. That's what we do. And that means that we've always had to face a particularly intense version of what computer scientists call the explore-exploit dilemma. People sometimes talk about intelligence, both natural and artificial, as if it's just a single magic substance, a special sauce that some people have more of than others. But in fact, there's many very different competing cognitive capacities, different intelligences that serve different functions and have different strengths and weaknesses. It's the combination of all of those intelligences, all those different ways of approaching the world that make human beings so successful. And when people talk about intelligence, they also, natural or artificial, they also often focus on just one of those capacities, the ability to exploit, as computer scientists say, to define particular goals and focus and plan and act to achieve those goals. Now, you've already done a lot of that kind of thinking. Everyone in this room has a lot of that kind of intelligence. And you'll have to do more as you go out into the world. It's essential to get anything done out in the world. But that exploit kind of intelligence is actually in conflict with another kind of intelligence, the explore intelligence that's at the heart of science, that drive to think as many possibilities as you possibly can, and to find out what the world is like just for its own sake. And there's a kind of beautiful paradox that results from this. To achieve your goals in the long run, you have to turn your back on them in the short run. To succeed in the end, you have to be willing to fail first. More than that, when you're driven by that scientific desire, that restless curiosity, you stop caring about your ultimate success and failure altogether. What you care about is figuring out what's going on. But the beautiful paradox is that that is exactly what leads to the amazing scientific victories through time, the unprecedented contributions science has made to human well-being, at least so far. Over and over, the unexpected discovery, the counterintuitive surprise, that's the thing that pays off in the end. One of the most striking features of human history is the way that pure curiosity-driven research leads to what were once literally unimaginable practical results. Nothing could be weirder than the idea that we're surrounded by tiny invisible animals that can live inside us. Anyone who would think that, I mean, you'd have to be either a scientist or a 4-year-old to get that idea, something I'll get back to in a minute. But the science of sewers, not to mention vaccines and antibiotics, obviously, means that all of us can just take it for granted that when we have a child, that child will live to be an adult. It's hard to believe, but that was an impossible hope, an unimaginable possibility for almost all of human history. So that scientific ability to just think about little tiny animals that live inside us is the reason why now we can have children and assume that they're going to grow up to be adults. All right, one solution to the explore-exploit dilemma is to have a kind of division of labor. There's a special group of humans who are dedicated to pure exploration, who experiment and hypothesize in every waking moment, and many sleeping ones too. And, okay, guys, you all here do that. But the people who do that best are actually the people who are sitting in that row over there. The people who do that best are babies and young children. The version of that division of labor that led to formal science and that you see around you in this room is a relatively recent invention. The ancient evolved solution is childhood. Across many species, a large brain and a reliance on learning comes with a longer childhood, and we humans have the longest childhood and the largest brains of any primate. Childhood is another example of the beautiful paradox of exploration. It takes enormous work just to keep children alive, just, keep them in the room, make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. They're really awful at exploitation. They're distractible and impulsive and both metaphorically and literally noisy, and they have trouble focusing for long enough to put on a snow jacket and get to preschool. But they're cauldrons of curiosity, and they frequently will even risk their own survival in mad pursuit of knowledge. Developmental cognitive scientists, including scientists right here at MIT, have shown that they're also the best learners in the universe. And those two things go together. The very things that make them bad at getting to preschool in the morning are the things that make them incredibly brilliant learners. Scientists right here at MIT and elsewhere have charted how effectively children can create new theories, how brilliantly and actively they explore and experiment. I want to just describe one experiment, actually rather an old experiment now, that I think really demonstrates this and makes a point for all of the scientists, the older scientists among us too. This was an experiment that a developmental psychologist named Carolyn Roby-Collier did. And what she did was take little babies, 6-month-olds, babies lie in their crib, and often you'll put a mobile up on top of them to give them something to look at. Babies look at it for a little bit, and then they get kind of bored. But what Carolyn did was actually tie a ribbon from the baby's foot up to the mobile, which meant that now the baby could experiment. The baby could kick their leg, and something would happen to the mobile. And what she discovered was that even these tiny 6-month-old babies, when you gave them the chance, would go nuts experimenting. They could spend the next 15 minutes kicking their legs and trying to see what the effect would be on the mobile. And they didn't just kick their legs, then they'd try their other leg. And then they'd try kicking for a little bit and then not kicking. And then they'd see, if you kick really hard, they'd look up at the mobile and see, oh, wait a minute, the mobile shakes really hard. How about if you try kicking just really gently? Oh, now the mobile just goes very gently. So even these tiny babies in this incredibly limited space, barely able to get up and reach for things, had learned to experiment. And here's my favorite part of this study. They giggled, they cooed, they laughed. They thought this was just the most fun thing that you could do in the universe, is do an experiment and see what happens. And I think the moral of that is the point of experimentation. Experimentation isn't just a job. Experimentation is a joy. And experimentation has been a joy ever since you were 6 months old. Now, there's a lot of other stuff that you have to do that's not so joyful. But at least one piece of advice I could give to every budding scientist in this room is to be more like a child, or even more like a child than you already are. Cognitive psychologists say that children are like scientists, but it's even more true that good scientists are like children. And again, I think everyone in this room will recognize that those similarities. Recapture that openness and curiosity, that spirit of play. Welcome randomness and noise, the unlikely guess and the low probability bet. And you might at least try for a toddler's courage, too. Babies learning how to walk fall 20 times an hour. Learning the secrets of the universe means taking some falls, too. You probably haven't fallen 20 times an hour as you've been going through your graduate work, but you've certainly fallen plenty of times. Of course, one of the challenges of science is that you have to combine that childlike exploration with more grown-up planning. So there's an interesting question. How do children get the resources that they need to explore, to learn as much as they do, if they're so bad at exploiting? And I think this is the second part of what I want to say about intelligences. They rely on another type of intelligence, an even more neglected and undervalued kind of intelligence, but one that's equally important to allow exploration and discovery. And that's the intelligence of caregiving. Cultivating care is important for everybody, but it plays an essential and very much underappreciated role in science as well as in childhood. Just as human children are helpless for much longer than any other species, we have many more caregivers than any other species. Human children have caregivers that include biological mothers, but also fathers and uncles, siblings, preschool teachers, and babysitters, and my personal favorite, the distinctively human postmenopausal grandmother. Now, the thing about these caregivers is that they all have to exercise a particularly demanding, special kind of intelligence, unlike either exploration or exploitation. Because when you're taking care of someone else, you aren't trying to achieve your own goals. What you're trying to do is figure out how you can help them to achieve their goals. And even more profoundly, you want to figure out how to allow them to make up new goals of their own, to decide that they want something different from what you want for them or what everybody has always wanted before. Now, caregivers keep children alive and more or less, hopefully, safe during their period of wild exploration. But they also do more than that, because the other thing that caregivers do is pass on the accumulated knowledge of previous generations. And that's another really distinctive thing that makes humans so cognitively successful. Each human generation can take advantage of the discoveries of previous generations at the same time that we don't have to just accept them. We can revise them and transform them, elaborate on some ideas, and discard others. And this cultural evolution is yet another of the distinctive secrets of human success. And caregivers, especially those postmenopausal grandmothers, it turns out, but the grandfathers too, play a central role in that process. They're the ones who are passing on the wisdom of the ancients and the elders onto a new generation. Care enables change. Love is what lets us learn. Now, of course, all the caring parents and loved ones in this room and outside of it have contributed to your success, and we can look around the room and acknowledge their role in the progress of science. But you may not realize it, but in the course of becoming scientists, especially in this graduate school of science, you've also benefited from a particularly potent form of caregiving. And on top of that, you've been learning how to be that kind of caregiver yourself. Teaching, and especially graduate mentoring, is one of the best examples of a relationship of care. A teacher shouldn't dictate the goals or outcomes to the student. Instead, what they do is pass on their accumulated knowledge to help the student to figure out their own goals, figure out what they want to do themselves. And those goals might be very different from what the teacher or the graduate advisor would do themselves, or even what they think it would be best for their own students to do. And the great teachers, and indeed the great students, are the ones who can negotiate that relationship between the knowledge of the teacher and the goals of the students. Now, all of you in this room have depended on that kind of care to allow you to both take on the wisdom of the past, of all those elders, and then try something completely new. And on top of that, you've learned how to provide that kind of care to your fellow students. There's a reason research and teaching are the two pillars of science, just as the complementarity of children and caregivers is the evolutionary key to human knowledge, progress, and exploration. You could think about something like going to MIT as really being a chance to listen to an awful lot of old grandmom stories about what happened in the past. Those of you who have graduate mentors will recognize this similarity to grandmoms telling stories. But also to play with lots of toys with people who are willing to pick up after you, even if your toys might be a tad more expensive than the ones you find in the average nursery. Now, one kind of care comes from your teachers, your mentors, your parents, your caregivers. But a lot of that care also comes from the society at large. Institutions like the National Science Foundation or the National Institute of Health, the National Research Council. And at their best, you could think of them as being the village's caregivers. They're providing a context for exploration, a garden full of the right toys, the resources, the peanut butter sandwiches that you need to stay alive while you're doing that kind of exploration. Now, exploration and care, especially in our society, are rarely valued for their own sake. We tend to live more in a world of exploitation. So often there's a kind of pressure to make those institutions justify their existence in terms of some particular benefits or outcomes that they're going to provide. But the beautiful paradox of exploration applies here especially forcefully. The fact that those institutions provided opportunities for exploration is precisely what's responsible for the great practical and economic successes of the United States, for example, over the past 50 years. It's the caregiving of the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, that's let us build the world around us. Now, as was mentioned before, these institutions are under attack right now, and one of your most urgent tasks will be to defend and to rebuild them. I think it's worth pointing out, though, that this is not a brand new task. Exactly 250 years ago, a group of great revolutionary thinkers gathered to change the world. Not the group that you're all thinking about. This was a different group. This was something called the Lunar Club. This was a group of scientists and engineers, although Benjamin Franklin was actually part of both groups, both founders and a member of the Lunar Club. There was probably a little bit of a comment about the general weirdness of what they were doing in calling themselves the Lunar Club. They were all people who would fit right in this room at MIT. They included James Watt, who invented the steam engine, Joseph Priestley, who discovered oxygen with Antoine Lavoisier, Josiah Wedgwood, the designer and entrepreneur and abolitionist, and Erasmus Darwin, the doctor and biologist and early thinker about evolution. I highly recommend Jenny Uglow's marvelous book about them called The Lunar Men. But the part of their story that feels especially urgent now is not that glorious time in 1776, but 25 years later. By 1800, the lunar men were facing a series of challenges to all their most treasured ideas, including the very idea that science itself was something you should believe in and treasure and foster. In England, reactionary mobs shouting, "No philosophers! Church and king forever!" smashed Joseph Priestley's lab, destroyed his instruments. In those days, by the way, everybody, all scientists were philosophers, and vice versa. In France, even more painfully, revolutionaries and radicals who had once supported science executed Lavoisier. They turned against science, declaring the Republic has no need of scientists. The Republic could find out what it needed to do from its authoritarian leaders instead. Now, it's heartbreaking to read the late letters of the Lunar Club. They looked at what was happening around them and they said, look, maybe this is it. We had 25 years of progress and hope and science and all these amazing accomplishments, but maybe that was it. Maybe it's over. But they didn't give up. In fact, Priestley fled to the United States, as scientists from Germany and Russia, Iran, and China would later, and the United States was a great welcoming home for science. And the people that the lunar men had taught and cared for kept the scientific project and enterprise alive. Erasmus Darwin and Josiah Wedgwood were grandfathers both metaphorically and literally. Charles Darwin's mother was Josiah Wedgwood's daughter, and his father was Erasmus Darwin's son. So that was a case where the grandparents literally were responsible for the great development of Charles Darwin and the science that would have a great renaissance in the next century. This is not to say, oh, it's all going to be okay. Who knows whether things are going to be okay or not. But they are to say that the spirit of hope and belief and dedication and faith that I talked about to begin with is a spirit that will enable and can enable us to keep going. And something that I want to say about the evolutionary picture that I mentioned before is that I think one of the things about this complementarity of exploration and caregiver that's so distinctively human is the way that it allows us to do things over time. So when we do science, we're not just in the moment. What we're trying to do is relate to a long history of all the people who came before us, and we're trying to contribute to the long future of all the people who will come after us. And that's an essential part of caregiving, too. What we do when we take care of people is put together the past, the grandparents, the future, the children who are sitting in the front row there. So congratulations to all of you with this wonderful accomplishment that you will take on as you go out into the world. The best scientists and the best universities like MIT, also much like the best families and the most thriving villages and the most successful democracies throughout human history, combine the spirit of exploration and a framework of care. So as you go out into the world, try to be both a child and a caregiver and an explorer. What you should do is aim for the creativity and craziness of the children around you, and combine that with the wisdom, the warmth, the care of the grandparents around you. So congratulations, may you go forth and continue to both be grandparents and be children. Thank you.